I'm Sherlyn, 26 years old, and I am the living ghost of a legacy that was never meant for me. For many years, my parents told every employer in our affluent corner of the North Shore that I was a thief. For 2 years, I couldn't get hired anywhere in my town, not because I lacked qualifications. I graduated with a 3.9 GPA in accounting from a top-tier state university, a feat I achieved while balancing a crushing workload. I had glowing recommendations from professors, but none of that mattered because Grant Thornton, a man whose name is etched into the cornerstone of half the skyscrapers in this county, told every employer in town that I was a thief. My father said, "Maybe now you'll learn to respect the hand that feeds you." He thought he'd broken me. He thought 2 years of systematic rejection, 2 years of watching me scrub grime from budget hotel toilets while he laughed over single malt scotch, would bring me crawling back to his mahogany desk. He didn't know about the envelope. He didn't know what my grandmother Maggie had done 15 years ago, or why the CEO of Mercer Holdings was quietly tracking my social security number, waiting for a signal. Before I continue, if you find this story worth hearing, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with what I'm sharing. Drop a comment below with your city and local time. I'm curious to see how far these echoes of family secrets travel. Now, let me take you back 2 years to the day I discovered the surgical precision with which my own flesh and blood had lobotomized my future. The Thornton family looked perfect from the outside, a high-definition postcard of the American dream. My father, Grant Thornton, owned the largest construction company in our county. Our 2-story colonial sat on 3 acres of manicured Kentucky bluegrass, featuring a garage that held his Mercedes, my mother's Lexus, and my brother Jax's BMW, a graduation gift for finishing business school at an Ivy-adjacent institution. My mother Eleanor played the role of the devoted wife with the grace of a silent film star. Wedgwood china for Sunday dinners, fresh flowers from the farmer's market every week, a smile that never cracked in public, tightened by years of maintaining appearances. And Jax, 4 years older, the golden child, the heir apparent. He'd been groomed to take over Dad's company since he could hold a hammer. Everything he touched turned to opportunity. Everything I touched was audited, scrutinized, and ultimately questioned. Growing up, I learned early that daughters had a different place in the Thornton hierarchy. When Jax wanted to study abroad in London, to expand his networking horizons, Dad wrote the check without blinking. When I asked about the same program 2 years later, he laughed as if I'd suggested burning the money for warmth. "What for? You'll get married eventually. Save me the money." I went to the state university 40 minutes away, lived at home, and felt the miles on the odometer count down my autonomy every single day. At family dinners, the conversation always orbited around Jax, his projects, his promotions, his future. I sat at the end of the table, passing dishes and clearing plates while Dad carved the roast and dispensed wisdom to his son. "A man builds his legacy through his work," Dad would say, pointing his fork at Jax. "The rest is just noise." Remember that? He never pointed that fork at me. When I was 16, I overheard him telling my mother something I've never forgotten. They were in the kitchen, voices low, and the smell of expensive roast beef felt suffocating as I lingered in the shadows. "Daughters don't need to achieve," he said. "They need to learn how to keep a home. Sherlyn will marry well. That's her job." I stood there in the hallway, frozen, realizing I wasn't a daughter. I was a strategic asset. That was the first time I understood. In my father's eyes, I wasn't a person with dreams. I was an asset to be managed. The summer before college, my parents gave me a credit card. For necessities, Eleanor said, sliding the slim plastic across the kitchen table like a gambler playing a high-stakes card. Books, supplies, whatever you need for school. Dad nodded from behind his Wall Street Journal. Don't go crazy, but you're covered. I was 18, eager to prove I could be responsible. I used the card exactly as intended. Textbooks for my accounting courses, a secondhand laptop from the campus tech sale, notebooks, calculators, nothing frivolous. The total over 3 months came to $1,200, a rounding error in my father's annual wine budget. When the statement arrived, Grant exploded. I remember the dining room, the crystal chandelier above us vibrating with his rage, the way Eleanor's face went pale as Dad slammed the paper on the table. $1,200. He was standing now, veins visible in his neck like jagged lightning. Who gave you permission to spend this much? You did, I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. You said it was for school supplies. I said necessities, not a shopping spree, Sherlyn. Eleanor murmured weakly, The girl needs to learn, Grant. The books were expensive this semester. Stay out of this, Eleanor. He turned back to me, eyes cold as a Midwestern winter. You'll pay back every cent, every single cent. Or you can find somewhere else to live. I worked 2 part-time jobs for 8 months, the campus library morgue and double weekend shifts at a local Starbucks. I paid back every dollar, kept every receipt, and filed them away with the precision of a forensic accountant. The debt wasn't the only cost. Working 25 hours a week meant I couldn't take full course loads. I had to stretch my degree over 6 years instead of 4. 2 extra years of tuition Dad refused to help with. 2 extra years of commuting in a beat-up sedan while Jax cruised in his Beamer. 2 extra years of being reminded I was a burden. I thought it was over. I thought he'd forget. But my father had a long memory, and he knew how to weaponize it. Eleanor found me crying in my room that night. She sat on the edge of my bed, stroked my hair, and said, Your father just wants to teach you the value of $1. In his world, control is the only currency. He loves you. Don't be angry. I wanted to believe her. I was desperate to believe a lie rather than face the cold truth of my father's narcissism. That was my mistake. The only person who ever made me feel like I mattered was my grandmother. Maggie Hayes wasn't soft. She'd built a chain of furniture stores from nothing, starting with a single showroom in 1972, expanding to 11 flagship locations across the tri-state area. She sold the whole operation when she turned 65 and retired with enough money to never worry again. She was sharp, practical, and she saw things other people missed, including the slow erosion of her daughter's soul in that marriage. I spent summers with Grandma Maggie when I was young. Her house smelled like lavender and old books. She taught me to read financial statements before I was 12, turning balance sheets into bedtime stories. She showed me how compound interest worked using her own investment portfolios. Knowledge is freedom, Sherlyn, she'd say, tapping her temple. No one can take what's in here unless you let them hold the key. She watched my father carefully during family gatherings. I noticed the way her eyes narrowed when he dismissed my opinions, the way her jaw tightened when Jax got praised and I got ignored. One afternoon, I was 15. We were sitting on her porch watching the sunset over her garden. Out of nowhere, she took my hand. "Sherlyn," she said quietly, "I want you to remember something." I looked at her. Her eyes were serious in a way I hadn't seen before. "I've already prepared for your future. When the time comes, you'll know." "Prepared what, Grandma?" She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Your father can't control everything. Neither can your mother. Someday you'll need help they won't give you. When that day comes, you'll be ready." I didn't understand what she meant. I was 15. I thought she was being dramatic, a classic trait of the Hayes women. 3 years ago, Grandma Maggie passed away. She was 78. I didn't know then that she'd left me something far more valuable than money. She'd left me a way out. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in accounting, 3.9 GPA, Dean's List every semester. A professor who'd worked at Deloitte wrote me a glowing recommendation letter. For the first time in my life, I had something that belonged to me, credentials no one could dismiss. The graduation ceremony was on a Saturday in May, the air thick with the scent of blooming lilacs and false promises. I walked across the stage in my cap and gown, diploma in hand, and scanned the crowd for my family. They were there, but they weren't watching me. Dad and Mom flanked Jax in the third row. He'd driven down to support me, but the three of them were deep in conversation, heads together, about something Jax had probably posted on LinkedIn. When my name was called, only Grandma Maggie's empty seat in my heart acknowledged the moment. Afterward, Dad found me outside the auditorium. "Nice job," he said in the tone he used for the mailman dropping off a bill. "Listen, I've got a proposition. Come work at the company. We need someone to handle the books." My heart lifted for a second. Maybe the degree had finally validated my existence in his eyes. "The position is unpaid for the first year," he continued. "Consider it an apprenticeship. You'll live at home, help your mother, learn the business. In a few years, when Jax takes over, you'll be useful." Unpaid, living at home, a glorified secretary to my brother. I took a breath. "I appreciate the offer, Dad, but I'd like to try finding work on my own first, get some outside experience." His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes went cold as a predator losing its grip. "Fine," he said softly. "Try it your way." He turned and walked back to the car where Eleanor and Jax were waiting. None of them looked back. I stood alone in the parking lot, still holding my diploma, and told myself I'd made the right choice, unaware that I'd just declared war on a man who didn't believe in ceasefires. I had no idea that his silence was a declaration of war. The rejection letters started coming within weeks. First, the accounting firm downtown, Miller and Associates. I'd interviewed beautifully. The hiring manager had smiled, shaken my hand, said they'd be in touch soon. 2 days later, "We've decided to go with another candidate." The email was cold, sterile, and smelled of a backroom deal I wasn't privy to. I applied to the regional bank next, First National of Illinois. Same thing. Great interview, warm reception, then the sudden icy silence, followed by a form email from a no-reply address. then the insurance company, the property management firm, the medical billing office, the credit union. 15 applications, 15 interviews, 15 rejections. I started doubting myself. Maybe my resume wasn't strong enough. Maybe my 3.9 GPA was just a number on a page that meant nothing in the real world. Maybe I'd said something wrong. Maybe I was overestimating my abilities. I spent nights revising my cover letters until 3 a.m., practicing interview answers in the mirror, reading career advice blogs until my eyes burned like they'd been rubbed with sand. Nothing changed. One afternoon, I walked into Patterson Financial Services for what felt like my 20th interview, my goodwill suit feeling heavier with every step. The HR manager, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes named Mrs. Gable, listened to my answers, nodded along, and then paused. She looked at me for a long moment, her pen hovering over my pristine application. Something shifted in her expression, a flash of pity that felt like a slap. "Miss Thornton," she said slowly, "I'm going to tell you something I probably shouldn't." My stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. "You seem like a lovely young woman, qualified, professional." She hesitated. "But I think you should talk to your father." "My father? Why?" She pressed her lips together, clearly uncomfortable, glancing at the closed office door. "I can't say more than that. Just ask him. Ask him why no one in this town will hire you, even for a junior clerk position." She stood, signaling the interview was over. I drove home with my hands shaking on the wheel, the Chicago skyline blurring in my periphery. A cold certainty was forming in my chest, something I didn't want to believe, but I had to know. That night, I confronted my father, and what he told me changed everything. I found him in his study, sitting behind the mahogany desk he'd imported from England, a glass of scotch sweating on a leather coaster beside him. "Dad, I need to talk to you." He didn't look up from his papers. "Make it quick. I have a board meeting in 10. "Why can't I get a job?" That made him look up. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth, the smile of a grandmaster who had just cornered a pawn. And in that moment, I knew. "You called them," I whispered. "You called all of them." He leaned back in his chair, swirling his scotch, the ice cubes clinking like a death toll. "I told them the truth." "What truth?" "That you're a thief." He said it casually, like he was discussing the weather. "That you stole $1,200 from your own family. That you can't be trusted with corporate money." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I paid that back. Every cent, I paid that back." "Did you?" He shrugged. "That's not how I remember it, Cherlynn." My voice cracked. "Those were textbooks you said I could." "What I remember," he interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, "is my daughter stealing from me. And I think potential employers deserve to know what kind of person they'd be hiring before they hand over the keys to the vault." My mother Eleanor appeared in the doorway, twisting her hands, her diamond rings catching the light. Something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or the ghost of the woman she used to be before 30 years with Grant wore her down. "Grant, maybe we should—" "Eleanor, this is between me and Cherlynn." She flinched. For a split second, her eyes met mine, and I saw it. She knew this was wrong. She knew, but she looked away, retreating into silence like she always did. That hurt almost more than Dad's cruelty. He was a monster. She was a witness who chose not to see. I stared at him, tears burning behind my eyes. Why? Why would you do this to me? He stood slowly, walked around the desk, and stopped in front of me, looming over me with the weight of his legacy, close enough that I could smell the scotch on his breath. Because you needed to learn respect, he said quietly. You turned down my offer. You thought you could make it without this family. Without me. He smiled a thin, predatory line. Maybe now you understand. You can't. Come home, Eleanor said softly from the doorway. Work for your father. This can all go away with one phone call. I looked between them, my mother's pleading face, my father's cold satisfaction, and I understood. This wasn't about respect. This was about ownership. In a small town where the Thornton name was synonymous with power, gossip travels faster than truth. Within weeks, I felt the shift everywhere I went. At the grocery store, neighbors who'd known me since childhood suddenly couldn't meet my eyes over the produce bin. At church, conversations stopped when I walked past, the silence echoing louder than the hymns. The woman at the dry cleaner, who'd always asked about my studies, started treating me like a stranger. The whispers were everywhere. Did you hear about Grant's daughter? Such a shame. The family's devastated. They tried to help her, you know. She just wouldn't listen. Poor Eleanor. My father had been strategic. He hadn't just called employers. He'd seeded the story throughout his network. Golf buddies, Chamber of Commerce colleagues, neighbors at dinner parties over Wagyu beef and Cabernet. The narrative was always the same. Troubled daughter, theft problem, family trying to cope. He never lied outright. He just told his version. And in a town where Thornton Construction had built half the commercial buildings, his version was the only one that mattered. Jax made it worse. I ran into him at the coffee shop one morning, one of my old part-time jobs. He was with friends, guys I vaguely recognized from his fraternity days at U of C. Hey, little sister, he called out loud enough for everyone to hear. Still looking for work? I heard Dad might have an opening for a shredder. Oh, wait, he laughed, leaning against his BMW key fob. You'd probably steal from the register. His friends snickered. I left my coffee on the counter and walked out, face burning with a heat that felt permanent. At home that night, I looked at my bank account. $3,000 in savings. Rent was due in 2 weeks on my tiny studio apartment. I had maybe 2 months before I'd be completely broke. 2 months before I'd have no choice but to crawl back to my father's house and accept whatever crumbs he offered. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't. The Willow Inn sat on the edge of town, a modest hotel that mostly served traveling salesmen and families visiting the nearby state park. It was a place where the Thornton name carried no weight, and the rooms smelled of lemon furniture polish and faded dreams. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hiring. The job listing said, housekeeping staff needed, no experience necessary, no references required. I applied online at 2 a.m. when the shame felt less sharp. 2 days later, I was standing in the employee break room filling out paperwork. The manager was a woman named Linda Crawford, mid-40s, no nonsense, with the kind of tired eyes that suggested she'd seen plenty of hard luck stories walk through her door. She looked at my application, then at me. Accounting degree, she said flatly. GPA 3.9. And you want to clean hotel rooms? Yes, ma'am. Why? I could have lied, made up something about wanting experience in hospitality, but I was so tired of lies. Because no one else will hire me, I said, and I need to eat. She studied me for a long moment, her gaze piercing through my facade. I wondered if she'd heard the rumors, if she'd call my father for a reference, and this door would slam shut too. Instead, she nodded once. I don't care what people say about you, Miss Thornton. I care whether you show up on time and do your job. She slid a uniform across the desk, pale blue polyester that felt like sandpaper. Shift starts at 6 a.m. Don't be late. I took the uniform with hands that weren't quite steady. Thank you. You won't regret this. She almost smiled. We'll see. Minimum wage, night shifts, scrubbing toilets and changing sheets while people who used to respect me pretended not to see me in the hallways. But it was work. It was a paycheck my father couldn't veto, and my father couldn't touch it. 6 months into my housekeeping job, my family decided to have dinner at the Willow Inn. In a town this small, I no longer believe in coincidences. I believe in choreographed humiliations. It was a Friday evening. I was pushing my supply cart down the service corridor, the wheels squeaking against the industrial carpet, when I heard a familiar laugh. My father's booming, self-satisfied bark that I'd learned to dread like a siren before a storm. I froze, pressed myself against the wall, the cold brick biting into my shoulder blades, and peeked around the corner. There they were, being seated in the hotel restaurant under the dim amber lights. Grant in his charcoal Tom Ford suit, Eleanor in her signature pearls. Jax checking his phone, looking like he'd rather be at a rooftop bar in Chicago. The hostess was leading them to a window table right in my sight line. I should have stayed hidden. I should have switched floors, asked another housekeeper to cover. But before I could move, my father's eyes found me, a predator locking onto a familiar scent. He saw the cart, the uniform, the yellow rubber gloves on my hands. His face split into the widest grin I'd ever seen, a jagged expression of pure triumph. Well, well, he nudged my mother, pointing directly at me. Eleanor, look, our daughter finally found her true calling. My mother's face flickered. Shame, maybe, or the lingering guilt of a woman who had traded her daughter for a comfortable cage. Jax just laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. Hey, Sherlyn, my brother called across the restaurant, loud enough for every guest to hear, his voice dripping with frat boy entitlement. Missed a spot in room 204. Better get on that before the tip drops. Several diners turned to look. Some recognized me. I saw the whispers start, rippling through the dining room like a contagion. I stood there in my wrinkled polyester uniform, holding a toilet brush while my family watched from their white tablecloth table with their crystal water glasses and their Rolex watches. My father raised his wine glass toward me in a mock toast. Maybe now, he said, just loud enough to carry. Now that you've tasted the dirt, you'll finally learn to respect us. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I just turned around and pushed my cart back down the corridor, my vision tunneled on the exit sign. But something hardened inside me that night, a cold, crystalline resolve. I remembered what Grandma Maggie had said. When the time comes, you'll know. When, I wondered. When? 3 weeks after the restaurant incident, I was cleaning out a box of old things from my closet, trying to sell whatever I could to make rent, when I found my old phone. The screen was cracked, the battery dead. I'd upgraded a year ago and forgotten about it. For some reason, I plugged it in. The phone buzzed to life, and notifications flooded the screen like ghosts from a previous life. Old texts from college friends I'd lost touch with, spam emails, and one voicemail from 3 years ago, right after Maggie died. I pressed play, heart suddenly pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Miss Thornton, this is Walter Henderson from Henderson and Associates law firm. The voice was professional, measured. I'm calling regarding the estate of Maggie Hayes. There are some documents pertaining to her will that require your attention. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. The message ended. 2 years. I had missed this call 2 years ago. I remembered that time, the fog of grief after Grandma's funeral. I hadn't been checking messages. I had assumed her estate was straightforward. Dad had told us she'd left everything to charity, with small gifts for each grandchild. Nothing significant, he'd said dismissively while sipping his morning coffee. Your grandmother was always sentimental and economically illiterate. I'd believed him. I grabbed my current phone and dialed the law firm. A receptionist answered. Henderson and Associates, how may I direct your call? I'm trying to reach Walter Henderson. He contacted me about my grandmother's estate, Maggie Hayes. A pause. I'm sorry, Mr. Henderson retired last year due to health issues. His cases were transferred to various attorneys. Another pause, keyboard clicking. I see a note here that Mr. Henderson attempted to reach you multiple times. The file indicates the calls went unanswered, and your father, Grant Thornton, eventually contacted the office and said you weren't interested in pursuing the matter. My blood ran cold. My father said, "What?" I'm just reading the notes, ma'am. It says, family representative confirmed beneficiary declined further contact. Grant had intercepted it. He told them I wasn't interested. He had surgically removed my inheritance before I even knew it existed. Can you tell me where the case was transferred? I'd need to check our records. Can you leave your number? I gave her my information, but something told me I wouldn't hear back. The trail had gone cold. But now I knew there was something in Maggie's estate that Dad hadn't told me about. Something he didn't want me to find. A month later, my father called. I almost didn't answer, but something, maybe desperation, maybe hope, made me pick up. Sherlyn. His voice was warm, too warm, the tone of a man trying to lure a stray cat back into a box. How are you? Fine, Dad. Listen, I've been thinking. This has gone on long enough. Your mother misses you. I miss you. He paused. Come home. I stared at the water stain on my ceiling, the one I couldn't afford to fix. Come home and do what? Work at the company. We need help with bookkeeping. I'll pay you. Not much at first, but something. You'll live with us, save money, get back on your feet. It sounded almost reasonable. Almost. And the job hunting? The things you told everyone about me? Water under the bridge. Come home and I'll make some calls. Clear things up. And if I don't? His tone shifted. The warmth drained out like water from a tub. Then you can keep scrubbing toilets until you wise up. Your choice. I closed my eyes. I need to think about it. Don't think too long. This offer won't last forever. That night, my mother called separately, her voice soft, pleading. Please, Sherlyn, just come home. Stop playing martyr. Your father only wants what's best for you. Does he, Mom? Or does he just want to control me? That's unfair. He's your father. He loves you in his own way. His way is destroying my life. Silence, then quietly. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I hung up without saying goodbye. Jax texted an hour later. Just give up already, sis. You're embarrassing yourself and us. The maid outfit doesn't suit the Thornton brand. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and started applying to jobs outside our town. Far outside. Places where the Thornton name meant nothing. I had to escape. 2 weeks later, I learned exactly what my father had planned for me. I was working the late shift at the Willow Inn, restocking supplies in the second floor closet, when voices drifted from the restaurant below. The ventilation ducts carried sound in strange ways, but then I heard my father's name, and then I heard mine. Tell you, Richard, it's perfect timing. Dad's voice, jovial, confident. Your son's looking to settle down. My daughter needs stability. Merge the families, merge the businesses. Thornton Construction and Palmer Plumbing. We dominate the county. A second voice, older, gruff. She's the one who's been causing trouble. The theft thing. That's handled. She's almost ready to come home. Another few months of this, Dad laughed, and she'll agree to anything, including meeting your boy. My blood turned to ice. He wasn't just my father. He was a broker, and I was the commodity. So what? An arranged marriage? I prefer strategic alliance, but yes, she'll do what she's told. By the time I'm done, she won't have any other options. The other man chuckled. Grant, you're a piece of work. All right, let's talk numbers. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor of the supply closet, surrounded by toilet paper and bleach. He was planning to sell me to a plumbing dynasty to secure his own empire. I thought about Grandma Maggie, her warning, her promise that she'd prepared something. I didn't know what she'd left me or how to find it, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I could not stay in this town, no matter what it cost me. I started applying to companies in cities I'd never visited: Chicago, Denver, Atlanta, anywhere far enough that a small-town construction mogul's gossip wouldn't matter. After weeks of nothing, the email arrived. Subject, interview invitation, Mercer Holdings. I had to read it 3 times before I believed it was real. Dear Miss Thornton, we have reviewed your application and would like to invite you for an in-person interview at our headquarters. Please note that this interview will be conducted by our CEO, Mr. Daniel Mercer, personally. Mercer Holdings. I'd applied on a whim. They were the largest financial firm in 3 states, a titan of Wall Street-level operations. Why would the CEO want to meet an entry-level applicant? Grandma's voice echoed in my head. When the time comes, you'll know. I hit reply before I could talk myself out of it. I am available at your earliest convenience. I was taking the bus to Chicago, and I wasn't planning on coming back. The night before my interview, I stayed in a budget motel near the Greyhound bus station, a place where the air felt heavy with the scent of industrial-grade pine sol and the lingering ghosts of 1,000 desperate travelers. The room was a sterile box of beige walls and flickering fluorescent lights that hummed with a low, irritating frequency. The mattress sagged in the middle, creating a valley of worn springs that threatened to swallow me whole. But it was clean and, more importantly, it was mine. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't sleeping under the suffocating roof of the Thornton estate, and tomorrow, the concrete jungle of Chicago might finally offer me a chance to change everything. I hung my secondhand navy blazer, a $15 Goodwill find that I had meticulously tailored with a needle and thread, in the dim light of the hotel break room in the bathroom. I turned the shower to the highest setting, letting the steam billow out until the small space felt like a sauna, using the moisture to coax the stubborn wrinkles out of the polyester blend fabric. I polished my only pair of heels, black, scuffed at the toes, and worn thin at the soles, until they caught the light. They weren't Louboutins, but from 5 feet away, they carried the silhouette of a woman who still had her dignity. I practiced interview answers until midnight, my voice a low murmur against the sound of distant sirens and the rattle of the heating vent. Tell me about yourself. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in accounting. I'm detail-oriented, hardworking, and eager to contribute to a team that values integrity. Why do you want to work at Mercer Holdings? Your company's reputation for ethical financial practices aligns with my personal values. I want to grow with an organization that does things right. Why the 2-year gap in your employment? That was the question that hung in the air like a poisoned fog, the one I had to navigate without sounding like a broken victim or a corporate liability. I practiced 10 different versions of the truth, filtering out the pain until only the professional shell remained. Linda, my manager at the hotel, had given me the day off without question. "Go get your life back, Sherlyn," she'd said, pressing a crumpled $20 bill into my hand as I clocked out. "This town is a graveyard for dreams, and your father is the undertaker. Don't you dare look back at the wreckage." I'd cried in the break room, a rare lapse in the armor I'd spent 2 years forging out of spite and survival. As I lay in that motel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling where the plaster was peeling in the shape of a jagged heart, I thought about Grandma Maggie. I thought about her sharp eyes, her smell of lavender and ledger ink, and the lawyer's call I'd missed during the darkest months of my grief. What had she left me? Why did a man like Daniel Mercer, a titan of the financial world whose name was whispered in the halls of the Federal Reserve, want to meet me personally? I fell asleep with questions circling my mind like restless birds, the rhythm of the city outside pulsing like a heartbeat I was finally beginning to share. In the morning, I put on my secondhand suit, the fabric feeling like a suit of armor against the biting Chicago wind. I took a deep breath, adjusted my laptop bag, and walked toward the CTA station. I didn't know it yet, but Maggie Hayes was about to keep her promise from beyond the grave. Before I tell you what happened at the summit of that glass tower, I want to ask you a question that cuts to the bone. Have you ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to be your sanctuary? If this story is echoing in the hollow parts of your own history, I want to hear your voice in the comments. We are not just sharing a script. We are documenting a resistance. The morning of my interview, my phone rang just as I stepped onto the plaza of the Mercer Holdings building, a gleaming monolith of steel and obsidian that seemed to hold the entire weight of the sky. I saw the caller ID, and my heart stuttered. Grant. My thumb hovered over the ignore button, but a cold curiosity made me answer. Sherlyn. His voice was flat, a controlled burn of professional malice. I hear you have an interview today. In the city, at Mercer. My stomach dropped, the acidity of my morning coffee burning my throat. How do you know that? Jax follows your Instagram, Sherlyn. Your little new beginnings post with the bus ticket was a masterpiece of tactical stupidity. He did some digging, figured out which firms you'd targeted. I've played golf with half the board members in this district, Sherlyn. The industry isn't as big as your dreams. One phone call. That's all it takes to turn a senior analyst role into a security risk. Or better yet, get back on the bus, come home, accept the Palmer merger, and I'll tell everyone this was just a misunderstood, rebellious phase. Last chance. I was standing on the sidewalk, looking up at 26 floors of glass reflecting the cold morning sun, and my father was trying to burn my bridge from 300 miles away. My phone buzzed again. A text from Jax. "You're done, sis. Dad already made the call. Enjoy the bus ride back to the maid's closet. Room 204 is waiting." My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone onto the granite pavers. I looked at the Mercer Holdings tower, its sharp edges cutting through the Chicago haze like a diamond. Maybe he'd already poisoned this well, too. Maybe I was walking into another rejection, another scripted humiliation orchestrated by the man who had turned my birthright into a prison. But I'd come too far. I'd scrubbed too many floors and swallowed too much pride to turn back now. I silenced my phone, squared my shoulders, and walked through the revolving glass doors. Whatever was waiting for me, a job or a final execution of my career, I would face it with my head held high. The lobby of Mercer Holdings was a cathedral of capitalism. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the frantic movement of people who moved with the speed of high-frequency trades. A 3-story atrium featured a modern art installation, shards of suspended silver that looked like a shattered mirror, a perfect metaphor for my life. I approached the reception desk, acutely aware of my scuffed heels and the way my $15 blazer didn't quite catch the light like the Italian silk walking past me. "Sherlyn Thornton? I have a 10 a.m. with Mr. Mercer," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she'd been carved out of ivory and cold-pressed juice, typed into her console. Then she looked up, her expression shifting from professional indifference to a strange, lingering curiosity. "Yes, Miss Thornton. Mr. Mercer has cleared his entire morning for you. You are to be escorted up immediately. Please take the private elevator on the far left, the gold-accented one, floor 26. The CEO's private office. This didn't fit any corporate protocol I knew. Entry-level accountants didn't get the gold elevator. There had to be a mistake. Or my father's call had worked so well that Daniel Mercer wanted to personally witness the daughter of Grant Thornton crawl. The elevator rose in a silent, pressurized rush. The doors opened onto a reception area that didn't just scream money, it whispered power. Original Picassos hung on the walls. The furniture was hand-stitched leather that smelled of success and old libraries. An assistant in a charcoal dress approached me. "Miss Thornton, Mr. Mercer has been waiting for this day for a very long time." She led me down a hallway lined with black and white photographs of the company's history and stopped at a heavy oak door. "Go right in," she said, and for a moment, I saw a flash of genuine warmth in her eyes. "You're home now." I pushed open the door, and the world as I knew it ceased to exist. Daniel Mercer was standing by a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the sprawl of the city. He was in his early 50s, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit, with a face that carried the quiet intelligence of a man who had seen the bottom of the world and decided to build a mountain on top of it. "Sherlyn Thornton." His voice was like velvet over gravel. "Please, sit. We have 20 years of history to catch up on. I sat in the leather chair, my heart hammering against my ribs like a frantic prisoner. Mr. Mercer, I'm not sure why I'm here. My father, he said. He held up a hand, a slight smile playing on his lips. Before we discuss your father's phone call, which was, quite frankly, a masterpiece of narcissism, I need to fulfill a contract. He walked to a safe built into the wall, a vintage Mosler with a polished brass dial, and entered a combination. This should explain why your father's influence stops at my front door. He pulled out a thick yellowed envelope, sealed with heavy red wax that had aged to the color of dried blood. On the front, in the elegant, sharp script of Maggie Hayes, were the words, "Only to be opened when Margaret has passed away, and Sherlyn Thornton stands in the office of Mercer Holdings." The date beneath it? 15 years ago. I was 11 years old when she wrote this. Your grandmother, Daniel said softly, placing the heavy paper in my trembling hands, was the venture capitalist who saved my life when the world called me a failure. 20 years ago, I was a man with a vision and zero credit. Maggie Hayes wrote me a check for $200,000 based on nothing but a handshake and her own intuition. She made me promise one thing, he continued, leaning back against his desk. She said, Daniel, someday my granddaughter will need a door that Grant Thornton cannot lock. When she walks through yours, you give her this envelope, and you give her the seat at the table she's earned. I've had a flag in our HR system since 2011, Sherlyn. Your name, your social security number. The second your application hit our server, my phone buzzed. I've been waiting for you to find your way here. My hands shook as I broke the wax seal. Inside were 3 items that turned my reality upside down. First, a letter. Second, a heavy embossed document. Certificate of Stock Ownership. Sherlyn Marie Thornton, 8% founding stake in Mercer Holdings, LLC. I read the numbers over and over, my brain refusing to process the sheer volume of zeros. I don't understand, I whispered, the paper rustling in my grip. Daniel pulled his chair closer. When Maggie invested, she knew Grant would eventually try to strip you of your identity. She didn't put the shares in her will. She put them in a blind trust, legally and irrevocably yours from the moment of the investment. You don't just work here, Sherlyn. On paper, you are one of the owners of this firm. The third item was a small leather-bound journal. I opened it to a random page. October 2008. Grant screamed at Eleanor for 3 hours over a $50 grocery discrepancy. He is breaking them both. I have started the Mercer Trust today. Sherlyn must have an exit strategy. Your grandmother was a tactical genius, Sherlyn, Daniel said, his voice thick with respect. She saw the cage Grant was building for you before you were even old enough to realize you were a prisoner. She couldn't stop him from being your father, so she ensured he could never be your master. That 8% stake? At current market valuation, it's worth more than your father's entire construction company and the land it sits on combined. I was sobbing now, the tears ruining the ink on the letter. She loved me this much. While I was scrubbing toilets and taking Jax's insults, while I was feeling worthless and discarded, I was secretly the most powerful person in the room. Maggie Hayes had spent 15 years quietly, secretly, constructing a fortress of financial independence for me. And today, the gates were finally open. Grant Thornton thought he'd destroyed my future, but Grandma had already bought the skyline. The Grand Meridian Hotel looked like a set from a Golden Age Hollywood film, a limestone fortress of old-world Chicago elegance that stood as a gatekeeper to the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers dripped from 30-foot coffered ceilings like frozen rain, their light refracting off the polished silver trays and the endless stream of vintage champagne. A live jazz quartet played in the corner, the bass notes thumping like a heartbeat against the marble floors. The guest list read like a who's who of regional power. Executives from the Board of Trade, politicians with carefully practiced smiles, and the kind of old money philanthropists who smelled of cedarwood and billion-dollar endowments. I watched from a private suite on the mezzanine level, my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror looking back at me like a stranger I was finally proud to meet. The PR team at Mercer Holdings had dressed me with the surgical precision of a high-stakes merger. Nothing ostentatious, just a simple navy sheath dress by Oscar de la Renta that hugged my frame with the authority of a tailored uniform. It was elegant but understated, paired with a single strand of pearls that had once belonged to Grandma Maggie, and a pair of sapphire earrings that caught the light whenever I moved my head. My hair was swept into a sleek chignon, revealing a neckline that no longer bowed in shame. I looked professional, competent, and undeniably powerful. I didn't look like the woman who had spent the last 700 days scrubbing the bacterial colonies off hotel toilets for minimum wage. I looked like the owner of the building. Through the reinforced glass of the mezzanine window, I spotted my family entering the ballroom like actors who had forgotten their cues. Grant entered first, his chest puffed out, surveying the room like a feudal lord inspecting his manor. His charcoal Armani suit probably cost what I used to make in an entire quarter at the Willow Inn, and he wore it like armor against a world he thought he'd already conquered. Eleanor trailed behind him in a classic Chanel suit, her smile fixed in that rigid Stepford wife grimace she used to mask the slow erosion of her identity. Jax was hovering near the bar, checking his titanium iPhone and looking bored, his movements radiating the toxic confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone but his reflection. They didn't belong here, but in their minds, the Thornton name was the ultimate VIP pass. I watched my father work the room, shaking hands with men he'd been trying to impress for decades, his laugh too loud, his gestures too wide, his desperation masked by a thin veneer of construction mogul bravado. He was trying to catch Daniel's eye, positioning himself strategically near the center of the room, oblivious to the fact that the woman he'd branded a thief was currently looking down on him from the heights of his own ambition. He had no idea that in 20 minutes, the foundation of his carefully constructed lies would be pulverized into dust. "Ready?" Daniel's assistant appeared beside me, her voice a soft anchor in the storm of my adrenaline. I took a deep breath, reaching into my clutch to touch the worn edge of Grandma Maggie's letter, my North Star. "Ready." "Mr. Mercer will introduce you after his opening remarks. You'll enter through the side door by the stage." She paused, studying my face with a look of genuine admiration. "For what it's worth, Sherlyn, everyone in this building knows what he tried to do. We've seen the credit reports, the phone logs, the sabotage. We aren't just hiring an analyst, we're welcoming a hero home. My throat tightened, the weight of 2 years of isolation finally starting to lift. Thank you. I stood alone for a moment, watching the crowd below shimmer like a sea of predatory fish. I couldn't hear the conversation from my vantage point, but I could see the body language unfold. Grant had finally cornered Daniel near the ice sculpture. My father was leaning in, all practiced charm and aggressive networking, gesturing broadly toward the city skyline as if he'd built the stars himself. Daniel stood with his hands clasped, his expression a mask of neutral politeness, occasionally nodding with the patient indulgence of a man who already knew the ending of the story. Then another executive joined them, Rachel, the chief operations officer. She asked Grant something about his family, a standard gala pleasantry. Grant's face shifted, something darker and more manipulative flickering in his eyes. He was talking about me now. I could see the way Rachel's expression soured, her polite interest turning to a sharp, clinical confusion. She glanced at Daniel, who remained silent. Grant laughed, that hollow, confident laugh of a man who believed his own propaganda. He was telling them the story of the troubled daughter, the thief, the girl who couldn't be trusted with the petty cash, let alone a legacy. He was poisoning my name in the one room where it actually mattered. Eleanor stood nearby, nodding along like a rhythmic accessory to his cruelty. Jax was at the bar, flirting with a senator's daughter, his privilege a visible shroud around his shoulders. This was my family. This was the unit that was supposed to protect me. Yet they were currently using my reputation as social currency to buy a bit of reflected glory. I felt the old shame rise in my chest, a phantom limb of the girl who used to cry in the library stacks, but it was quickly cauterized by a new sensation: absolute clarity. They had no idea that the thief was about to become their boss. Miss Thornton, the assistant was back. Mr. Mercer is beginning his remarks. 5 minutes until the world knows. I smoothed my navy dress, touched my pearls, and centered my breath. Daniel took the microphone as the crowd gathered around the stage. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the Mercer Holdings annual gala. For 20 years, this firm has been built on more than just capital. It's been built on the courage of those who saw the future before it was written. His voice carried through the speakers, silencing the room. Then his tone shifted, becoming more intimate, more lethal. Before we continue, I'd like to introduce someone who represents the very soul of this company. Someone who has endured the kind of systemic adversity that would break most people, yet stands here tonight with a 3.9 GPA, a master's level understanding of forensic accounting, and a spirit that cannot be auctioned off. The assistant touched my arm. That was my cue. I stepped through the side door and into the blinding light of the ballroom. 200 faces turned toward me in a synchronized wave of curiosity. I walked steadily, my head held high, my heels clicking against the marble with the rhythm of a ticking clock. The navy dress caught the light of the chandeliers, making me look like a figure carved out of the midnight sky. I didn't look at my father. Not yet. But I felt the exact moment the oxygen left his lungs. A sharp intake of breath somewhere to my left, a muttered curse from Jax. The unmistakable crash of a crystal champagne flute shattering against the floor. That was my brother's only contribution to the evening. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel continued, his voice warm and clear, vibrating with the satisfaction of a trap finally sprung. Please welcome our newest senior financial analyst and the woman who holds one of the original foundation stakes of this firm, Miss Sherlyn Thornton. Polite applause rippled through the room, the sound of 100 doors opening at once. I reached the stage. Daniel shook my hand, leaning close to murmur, "The floor is yours, partner." I turned to face the audience, and finally, I let myself look at my father. Grant stood frozen near the bar, his face the color of bleached bone, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream of disbelief. Eleanor had grabbed his arm, her knuckles white, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. Jax was staring at the broken glass at his feet, as if the physics of the world had suddenly ceased to function. I smiled, not a grin of malice, but a smile of pure, unadulterated peace. "Thank you," I said into the microphone, my voice amplified across the ballroom. "It is an honor to stand here, not as a ghost of this town, but as a stakeholder in its future." Then my father started moving. He pushed past a waiter, nearly knocking a tray of canapes into a congressman's lap. "Sherlyn!" His voice cut through the room like a serrated blade, raw with a rage he couldn't contain. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Security!" he barked, looking around wildly. "Someone get security! This girl shouldn't be here. She's a trespasser. She's a criminal." The room went dead silent. 200 of the most powerful people in the state watched Grant Thornton lose his mind in high definition. Daniel stepped forward, his voice a cool breeze against my father's fire. "Mr. Thornton, I'd suggest you sit down. You are making a spectacle of yourself." "You don't understand," Grant sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She's a thief. I told you this morning. She stole from her own blood. She's not qualified to clean your floors, let alone analyze your books." "Not qualified?" Daniel's eyebrow rose with the lethal grace of a guillotine. "Mr. Thornton, I am well aware of Sherlyn's qualifications. I've seen her transcripts, her certifications, and the work she's done under the radar for 2 years. I'm also aware," Daniel continued, his voice hardening into steel, "that you've spent the past 24 months blacklisting your own daughter. I'm aware that the theft you've been broadcasting was a $1,200 educational expense that she repaid in full with interest. And I'm certainly aware of the strategic alliance you were trying to broker with the Palmer family to sell her off like a piece of commercial real estate." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The social suicide of Grant Thornton was now public record. "Your daughter," Daniel said, letting the silence build until it was heavy enough to crush a man, "is not just an employee. Sherlyn Thornton owns 8% of Mercer Holdings. She has been a founding shareholder since she was 6 years old, protected by a trust your mother-in-law, Maggie Hayes, built specifically to shield her from people exactly like you." The room erupted in whispers that sounded like 1,000 snakes. I looked at my father. He looked smaller now, his expensive suit hanging off a frame that had suddenly aged a decade. "This is a scam!" he shouted, but it was the desperate cry of a man drowning in his own hubris. "This is fraud! My mother-in-law was senile. These documents aren't real." "The documents have been verified by 3 independent law firms, Grant. They are sealed, notarized, and filed with the SEC, Daniel said calmly. There is no ambiguity. There is only the truth. Eleanor had reached him now, tugging at his sleeve. Grant, please, she hissed. Everyone is watching. Stop it. He shook her off. His face was a mottled purple. You ungrateful little, he started, but security was already closing in. I stepped forward to the microphone one last time. I didn't come here tonight for revenge, Dad. I came here because I spent 2 years being defined by your lies. I was told that my only worth was my obedience. I was told that if I didn't surrender my life to your merger, I would starve in the dirt. I looked around the room. I worked at the Willow Inn. I cleaned the rooms of some of the people in this ballroom. And I realized something. The dignity of work is something you can never take away. But the power of a legacy is something you can never steal. I turned back to Grant. I wish you well, but I am done being a pawn in your construction projects. My name is Sherlyn Thornton, and for the first time in my life, I am the one who owns the house. I stepped back as the room erupted in a standing ovation. My family left the gala through the service entrance, shadows retreating into the Chicago night. Grant was storming toward the exit. Eleanor was weeping into her silk clutch, and Jax was staring at his phone, realizing his inheritance had just been cut in half by a sister he'd mocked for wearing a maid's uniform. 1 month later, my life was a symphony of competence and quiet wealth. I had a corner office on the 14th floor of Mercer Holdings overlooking the river. I had an apartment in the Gold Coast with floor-to-ceiling windows and a kitchen that had never seen a bottle of cheap cleaner. My net worth was valued at $2.4 million in liquid stock alone. On a quiet Sunday, I drove to the cemetery with a bouquet of yellow roses, Grandma Maggie's favorite. I sat by her headstone, the wind whispering through the trees. I made it, Grandma, I whispered. I found the door. I sat there until the sun went down, finally, truly, and irrevocably free.